California leads the country in police shootings by a lot. Data collected by Mapping Police Violence, a research collaborative that documents police killings, shows that out of 1,072 people killed by police in California between 2013 and 2018, only 0.3% of the killings resulted in some kind of criminal accountability for the officers shooting. There is a reason why. Almost nobody expected that Sacramento DA Anne-Marie Schubert would announce that there would be charges against the officers who shot Stephon Clark this past weekend. The law says that they acted lawfully in shooting. Police officers have more leeway than civilians do to shoot people due to the high-risk circumstances and the possibility of dangerous people they could confront on a much more regular basis than civilians do. But the standard in place for when police officers can legally use lethal force, basically kill someone, is when they consider it to be reasonable. That is a very broad standard. Right now, even if an officer is criminally negligent, and as a result of that negligence, she or he ends up under threat, they can still get away with killing someone. That's why Assembly members Shirley Weber and Kevin McCarty introduced a new bill that would establish more specific parameters for when cops can shoot, in the hopes that it saves civilian lives. The logic is that by knowing that they can be charged criminally, cops will be deterred from killing people. Think twice, basically. The bill would allow the legal use of deadly force in self-defense or in the defense of another person, when it is necessary, not only reasonable, that there were no alternative ways to de-escalate the situation.
It was not somebody had threatened somebody's life. You see what I'm saying? That was vandalism that had occurred. You don't even know if this man was the one who did the vandalism, but do you get shot for breaking a window in a car? You see what I'm saying? So if the question becomes, is my life being threatened by the act that took place, the outcome may have been different.
When the bill was introduced, I asked the president of PORAC, the Peace Officers Research Association of California, why do they continue to oppose this bill? This is what he said.
Well, I think what you're doing is you're creating a situation where officers are trying to respond to situations that are extremely tense. They're making decisions and split-second reactions. You know, we have to get beyond the myth of an unarmed person is not dangerous.
Police associations are opposing AB 392, as they did Dr. Weber's almost identical bill last year, AB 931. However, they are supporting a different Senate bill that would mandate statewide use of force policies and training, but would maintain the current reasonable standard as opposed to necessary.